Alright. Ironically, I was sitting there and worrying that I spelled the worrying spelling wrong there because I said 2 slides to you. I don't know which one you picked up. The first one had the wrong one, the second one had the right one. So, anyways, figure it out. Thankfully, Rohit has covered the basic human needs so that I can get into the philosophical side a little bit on this one. So, disclaimer, none of these thoughts are completely original of mine. These have been as a part of consumption of the books and content and other things. So, yeah. And I don't believe everything is right. So, if you feel that something is not right, please engage in a conversation. It's a very catchy phrase, focused worrying. What I mean to say is thinking in general. And when thinking goes on steroids, that is when it becomes worrying, right? So that's what I want to talk about today, about how worrying need not be really a bad word, and how we can channel it towards the right direction and then make the most out of it. Right. So, anyways, don't worry about this. I'm just a boring person. Let's move ahead. Right. Table of content. It's messy because that's how it is in my head. I have not created a very clear chart of what I want to talk about, but then this is how it is in my head. And I also believe that it's a Sunday afternoon and let it be as vague as possible. But then I want to talk about generally thinking, and it's also my own personal journey rather than me being preachy. It's about how I have evolved in the last few years based on the books I've consumed, how thinking and the thought process of mine has changed. That's what I want to talk about today. Right. Let's start with this question. Right. Everyone has that one book. This should not be the book which you read in the last 3 months, because generally we tend to feel that, wow, this is the best book I have read. This should ideally be the book which you read between your 16 to 22 when your thought process was still forming. I'm sure everyone has that one book which you really loved, right? Which anyone has that? Anyone wants to call out your favorite book? Alchemist, lovely.
It's not about the bike. Lance Armstrong.
Lance Armstrong. User Morris, nice.
Kite
Runner, nice, lovely.
Grapes of
Which was?
Grapes of Wrath.
I don't know what that. Okay, interesting.
Shootout.
Which was that?
Shootout.
Shootout, yeah. Mikey, lovely. Good to know that there are a lot of readers in the room, so my conversation becomes easier now. But yeah, lovely, nice. For me, it was Ayn Rand. So this is a little controversial, but then the point is, I read this book when I was just getting out of college, and the tone of, I really believe that the phase that you are in your life, and when you read that book, it really affects you. Probably if I read this book now, maybe it would not strike the right chords, but at that point in time, this was the book which really changed the way I thought about things. So without breaking the plot a lot, what really stuck about the Fountainhead and the way Ayn Rand wrote was, this was published in 1943, and it generally challenged the way people define success, right? The societal norms about integrity, and then what do you call as individuality, right? That's what the book was all about. And the book also speaks about following your own path. Just don't follow whatever the general society terms as, this is the blueprint, follow this, right? Whenever we follow a blueprint, that's the road of least friction. That, I think, will lead to least amount of worry, but then also in a way it leads to least amount of satisfaction, because you're just following someone else's blueprint. When you have your own blueprint, as in what defines your own success, what defines your own purpose, I think purpose Rohit covered quite a bit. But then when you have your own purpose and when you have your own vision, that's when you don't follow the blueprint. Also, it leads to friction and also worrying in general. And that's my take. At the end of the day, this is fiction. Everyone has their own take on the fiction and what they interpret from it. But this was my main takeaway from the book. So, at a very high level, again, without going into the details, if I have to just talk about the main character in the book, and if I have to introduce the main character, Howard Rock, in the book, this is what it would be. So he is one of the other characters in the book. He asked Rourke in one of the places that there is no one else here. Why don't you tell me what you think about me? And then Rourke says, but I don't think of you. Right? And it might not strike you so much right here just by reading that phrase, but then when you are in the context of that book, and when you are reading through the book, and when it hits you really hard. Right? So that's the point. I mean, if there was one introduction for the main character in the book, this was the main one for me, right? Then this comes second half into the book. But the point is, it's not that Rock did not worry. He did worry. But then he worried about the things which mattered to him. he had a very keen focus on his own set of values, on his own set of principles, and that is what he worried about. And he did not waste his energy on the other set of things which he thought which needed external validation. For example, Rogue is an architect in the book, and he does not follow the general convention of following symmetry just for the sake of it, right? Symmetry is generally considered in the classic architecture as the absolute requirement. You need to have symmetry if you look at any of the Gothic ancient architecture. But then he did not follow it. He questioned it. He was like, why are we making with wood where we know that it will rot in a few years? Why not with concrete? So he challenged those ideas, and so that's something which struck me at that point in time, right? It's that he's carving his own path, and that is leading to friction. When you go through the book, you can see that it leads to a lot of friction within his journey of his career. But then the point is, again, he didn't waste his time and energy on any of that. Now, if I have to transition from this fiction into something else, the main takeaway here is that he did not worry about the things which he did not control, which he did not have any control over. So that takes us to Stoicism. So Stoicism, the core philosophy of Stoicism in itself is that you worry about the things only for which you have control, right? So after going through the fictional part of Ayn Rand and geeking about all her other books and her core philosophy for over a period of few years, I think I eventually landed on to Stoicism after a few years, and then it also struck the right chords at that point in time. So Stoicism is a very broad aspect. I mean, most of you might already be aware about it. It's from 300 BC philosophy, and if it's very difficult to summarize it in one line, but then if we have to summarize it, it's about living in accordance with the nature. Don't do anything which is against the nature, because that's a high wind. That's what they generally prescribe. But unlike the fictional character which we spoke about earlier, Ayn Rand, for me, it was a very loose-ended framework of having a vision and purpose, but it did not give a framework to think. It was just a loose end that this is the ideal man and you follow this individuality. That's all there was. But then I did not. I'm an engineer at heart. I love formulas. Give me x plus y is equal to something, and I can put x and y and remove all the gray areas. That did not give me. Fiction does not give that. So Stoicism, although it did not give me a clear framework, it sort of gives that semi-structured framework about thinking what is in your control and what is not in your control. So if we can pick one or two aspects from the Stoicism, and if I can talk about it, so one more thing. So when I started my Stoicism journey, it was with this book called The Daily Stoic from Ryan Holiday. He has sort of renewed Stoicism now. He gives this some tiny bits within his book, like 1 page a day sort of thing. This is how I started. So the very first thing which I read in this book was on Jan 1st. It goes by date so that you can read one tiny thing every day. The very first thing was about control and choice. What you don't have any control over, don't worry about it. Move on with it. And about the things that you have control, that is where you have to make a choice, because you have control. There are those routes. Like if you decide this, then it leads to next set of root nodes. Then you decide this, it leads to next set of root nodes. So if you don't have any control, there is no point in thinking about it. So that's what, at a very high level, this is a discourse from Epictetus, one of the Stoics from the early days. So this was my first book when I started with Stoicism. But then this is a very introductory book. Like it touches very different aspects, but at the core of it, when you go in depth, there are great books like Letters from Seneca, Meditations from Marcus Aurelius, The Story of Philosophy by which mixes a bunch of things about Stoicism. But then what I like about Stoicism, and then tying it back to worrying again, is that it gives you a semi-structured framework. If you can go to the next one, maybe, it tells you about it goes into the details of. It gives you this framework of something called as dichotomy of control. So what it tells is there are only two ways of doing things. There are a bunch of things which are in your control, and there are a bunch of things which are not in your control. But then, from the current standpoint, when you look at it, the things which are not in your control can still be broken down into two sections. Some things which are semi-controllable, and some things which are absolutely not in your control. Maybe an example would help, right? So if tomorrow will there be an earthquake? I don't know. If it happens, that's absolutely not in any of our control. And if I have to sit today in the night and worry about it, I'm the most stupidest person in the room. So that's something which is absolutely not in your control. But then semi-control is if I have to play a tennis match, if I'll win the tennis match or not is semi-control. If I play a great match, there is a chance that I might win, but then it's still completely not sure that I'll win the match or not. So 99% of the things that we go through in daily life, they fall into semi-control. And how do we deal about it? So it gives this very vague framework. I know I'm touching at the very, very surface level. It also goes into the aspects of negative visualization and whatnot. I've written a question mark at the end of negative visualization because uh, I don't agree to it completely, because what it preaches is that you look at things and then think that this will not exist forever. And when you think about it like that, let's say for example, let's say if I have a nephew or niece, and then I know that I might not be there forever, and then when I think in the context that I might go away, I might move away for work, or he might go away for study, then I value the time that we have even more, and then we cherish that moment. So it talks about negative visualization, but then I don't believe every day morning we get up and we should think about, oh, I'll not have this, I'll not have this, I'll not have this, and I have to worry about it. So I'm not in complete favor of it, but then it's one of their concepts. So they have various other concepts also within Stoicism. For example, how do you deal with grief? How do you deal with things which are uh, like there is this classic quote of Seneca, writes Seneca's one of his students of Seneca is Lucilius, and he has written a bunch of letters to Lucilius, and those are converted into a book. And the most astonishing fact is that these letters were written like in 100 BC, and they are still relevant even today. Lucilius is not feeling great and he wants to run away from one place to another, what we call as traveling today. And Seneca says, you're so stupid because you're carrying your own head. Everything that is happening is within your head. No matter where you go, you cannot drop it out. So he says, sit down, think about it, sort it out. Traveling is not bad, go do whatever, but then that will not solve your problems, right? And I really adore the overall philosophy of it. So that's about the dichotomy of control. And then after Stoic philosophy, when I moved over, and then it was still vague because I still didn't get a proper equation, right? While it gave a sort of framework on how to think, what to think, it's more. I look at Stoicism as a manual for life. Uh, if you're not very clear about what is happening, when I'm not really sure how things are going on, then I go back to the manual and check things. I have my own notes, so go about it and see what works and what doesn't work. So it is something which grounds me and then brings me back to the core center. That's how I use Stoicism. But then it still didn't give me a proper mental model as such. So the term mental model, it was it's a very cliche term. I didn't like it the first time when I heard it a few years ago, like a bunch of years ago. It sounded as if like people were using it just to sound like an intellect. People would say, let's build a mental model around it. What do you even mean by that, right? What does it mean? How do I use it? So what clarified my thought process about mental models was these three books. There's so much content on mental models out there, but then these books by Shane Parrish. Shane Parrish is a great author. He also has a podcast called The Knowledge Project. Um, Great guy, brilliant guy, amazing content. He broke down the mental models into three volumes. The first one is about general thinking. General thinking, like it talks about uh, the first principle thinking, the second order effects, and whatnot. The second volume is about the physics, chemistry, and biology, and the third volume is about the system thinking and mathematics in general. So, just to give an example about this, I really enjoyed these books. So, just to give an example, if you can take one aspect from physics, the volume 2, he takes thermodynamics and then he applies it to daily life. Like, let's say I'm staying with my partner. Like, let's say a person A and person B. There are two different characters. They have their own personality, and they stay together after whatever. And then after a while, person A tends to become more like person B, and person B starts to become more like person A, very naturally, without forcing. That's what thermodynamics is. Thermodynamics is when you put two things of different temperature together, then they transition and then they reach an equilibrium state. Right? He takes that lateral thinking and brings on into the everyday aspect of life. That was just one example. Then he gives this frameworks for you which you can use and apply it across your daily life. So this in a way broke down what mental models is, and this in a way is the current state where I am right now. When I want to think clearly about something, then I go back to mental models and use Stoicism as my manual for just figuring out the emotional side of things. So within mental models, I thought maybe if I can give an example or two and tie it back to worrying, it would make sense. So I've just given one or two here. The first one is about the First principle thinking. So first principle thinking, what I like about this is when you look at any problem, like consider worrying in general. When you look at any problem, problems love to be big and scary, like messy hairball. That's what problems love to be, right? So if you can give it a character to any problems, it could be more like a scary figure in a Halloween party, which would come and try to scare you, right? So if you break that down, all those problems into small, tiny bits and pieces, they become less scary. It can be more attainable. So first principle thinking talks about taking any complex thing, breaking into the smallest aspects, and then see what makes sense and try to solve that. The example which I wanted to give was about the meat industry. So in 1960s, there was a study about why people like meat. What is the first principle thinking behind meat? So when a lot of questions were asked to people who love meat, and they were asked what is that you love about meat, it was mainly around the texture, the flavor that it provides, and the chewiness of it, and all those other answers. But there was not a single answer which said it has to be a part of an animal. So that started the moment of trying to produce synthetic meat, right? So that's how the first order principle thinking helps. It gets to the core and the fundamental aspect of anything, and then try to break it into the smallest concepts of it. So that's one example which I wanted to give. Also, I know it's vague, but also I had one more. I think, yeah, the second order effects. So this is from the book. I've just quoted it out of it. Uh, One of the main things is that you can never merely do one thing. What it means is everything has side effects. Worrying is mainly because we are afraid of those side effects. Whenever I want to make a decision, I'm afraid of what will happen with A, B, C, D, and all these consequences. That's what in general leads to worrying. So second order effect thinking is where you consider all the second order effects and then see whether do I really need to worry about it so much? Is it a one door decision or a two door decision? Can I come back and course correct it? Most of the things in life are not one door; they are all two doors. Unless based on the facts at hand, you decide, you move on, and then if it doesn't work out, you come back and course correct it. So 99% of the decisions in life are, in my opinion, are all two door decisions. So you don't get tied up. So within the second order effects, uh, you whenever I have to make a decision, I consider all the second order effects that can happen due to it, and then consider if they are good or bad second order effects. For example, I have to go into a meeting, and I know I'm tired. I know it is going to be a boring meeting, so I get myself a strong shot of espresso. That's the first order effect. Now I'm very attentive in the office. The second order effect is I'm very excited now, and I say yes to 3 new projects, and I trip for the next 2 months. So there is always a second order effect to it. So let me try to tie it up all together now, right? Uh, oh yeah, so there is one more part. So this is the last thing which I put in. After the after consuming all this content, how do I make sense of this now? Right? I'm very big on taking notes, uh, especially because books can only teach you to a certain extent. At the end of the day, at whatever physical and the mental state that you are in, you make your own notes, you make your own learnings, and those notes maybe you will come back to it maybe in 10 years or maybe in 15 years. That would make more sense to you because you have been through that journey, right? You are the same person who have made those notes based on connecting dots from all the content you have consumed. So I believe a lot in making notes. For making notes, I use Obsidian. Uh, I geek out on Obsidian quite a bit. There are various tools for making notes. What I like about Obsidian is it builds this mental map. Those are all my notes, about 700 of those. So you can tie them based on tags and whatnot. And what happens at the end of the day is, let's say I'm looking at a particular instance of a setup in Mac. I'm just giving a vague example. I click on it, it gives me the entire mental model of where all I have used those terms, where all I have used those tags, and then we humans are generally great at forgetting things. So I might have made a note, I might have forgotten it, but this helps me in tying it up all together. So just to conclude, so what I wanted to convey at the end of the talk is that worrying is not necessarily bad, which we get from the first book in itself, which is the fictional book Ayn Rand's book, which told me about having a purpose and value in itself is important. Stoicism in a way taught me about what is in control, what is not in control, what is that I should worry about in a vague sense, but also gave me a sort of mental model for it. So the mental models in themselves gave a clear framework, which I can use as an equation, put x, y, and derive out of it. So notes I use basically to capture all these thoughts and make sense for myself. So this was something which I've been obsessing about for a while now. So I thought maybe I'll just talk about it. So I guess that's me. Thank you.